Is this really what you want? Do you really want to see violence like this? Because this is what it is. Hey everybody, my name is Nick. I'm a director living in Taiwan, and today I'm going to be talking about the Edward Yang film, Mahjong. So, recently Luke and I were on the Flick Lab podcast. We were invited on to talk about Taiwanese New Wave film. It's a really great podcast, very entertaining, very fun to listen to. They talk about all kinds of movies, and they always have like a particular topic, and they pick a group of films to discuss. So we discussed 4 movies. We discussed Summer at Grandpa's and City of Sadness, directed by Ho Xiaoxian, and we also talked about Mahjong and Yi, directed by Edward Yang. I just wanted to discuss a little bit more about Mahjong and break down my interpretation of what I think this film is trying to do, and also why I think it illustrates the brilliance of Edward Yang. It should be noted that this movie is extremely hard to find. A lot of people will say when you read up about it that this is Edward Yang's worst film, and that might be true, but in my opinion, that is true because Edward Yang is such a great filmmaker. There is some pretty bad acting in this movie, and there's not really a good excuse for it, except to say that you can look past it, in my opinion. I was able to, because I think that the themes and what the movie's trying to do is so much bigger than a few bad performances. But if bad performances bother you, it will definitely bother you. You'll see exactly what I mean when you start to watch the movie. And yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I won't name names, but you'll know. At its core, this movie is a crime film. It centers around the story of a rich family. Father is hiding out because he owes money to a gang, and the gangs are trying to find and kidnap his son to get that money back. Redfish is the name of the son, and he himself is a small-time criminal. He runs a lot of small-time hustles, such as convincing people that his friend can read the future and then charging them for like fake psychic readings, little things like that. Redfish comes across this very earnest French woman named Marta. She has traveled to Taiwan with no money, no idea of what she's going to do, no plan on how to survive, but she's following somebody that she's in love with, an Englishman named Marcus. Marcus, they knew each other in London. He moved to Taiwan to work, and she is trying to find him and get him to admit that he still loves her. He won't do that, but he does kind of want to string her along. Redfish, when he comes across Marta, pretends to really want to help her and like tell her like, oh yeah, you got to be careful in Taiwan and I'm going to take care of you. Him and his friends Lun Lun and Hong Kong, his kind of like crew, they take her in, and Lun Lun and Marta develop a very strong connection and they fall in love. And it's based on their desire to kind of remain above the petty games and the hustles that everyone around them in the society is engaged in. If that sounds complicated, it kind of is. It's like all of Edward Yang's films, the plot is this sprawling web of interconnected characters and like a kind of a storyline that kind of intersects, connects. And that's what I really like about it. I think at the beginning of a lot of his movies, you don't really know who the important characters are, what the story really is about, and it takes a little bit of effort to watch and figure out what's going on, who matters. And he's very good at not giving any particular storyline weight in the beginning so that you can kind of figure it out for yourself. The film is about the manipulation and lies that are kind of required to engage in to live in a global society. And it kind of ties into the title of the film, Mahjong. So the game of Mahjong is only played in the background of the film. At one point, if you're not really paying attention, you might not even notice it. It's not like a movie about the game Mahjong, right? But if you are familiar with how the game works, it is a zero-sum game where you win when someone loses. So you when someone puts down the tile that you're looking for, and you take the money directly from them. And this is very similar to kind of the message of the film where you're taking from somebody. You're trying to manipulate them into giving you what you want. You take it from them and they lose it. And that's what's happening in the film with the way the characters are interacting with each other and the way that they are kind of playing each other and the way that they take from each other and the way that they lose things to each other. As the film goes on, you kind of realize that everything is a hustle. Everyone is taking advantage of everyone else or trying to take advantage of someone else. Everyone's setting up someone else. And if you aren't the one doing that, then you're the fool that's being taken advantage of. I'll give you an example of how this works in the movie. There's a side character named Angela. She's in a relationship with Marcus. But she's only manipulating him so that he'll pay for things or whatever she wants to get out of him. She doesn't really love him. She falls in love with Hong Kong, who's very handsome. All the girls like him. She falls hopelessly in love with him. And in the morning, with her completely head over heels, he convinces her that if she wants to be with him, she needs to sleep with all of his friends. And this is the first step in him essentially becoming her pimp and manipulating her so that he can sell her body as he wants. So he tries to pull his typical pimp routine on an older woman later in the film. And he falls in love with her. And he soon realizes that this older woman is using the same trick on him. And then she starts pimping Hong Kong out to all of her rich female friends. What happens to Hong Kong is kind of like this live by the sword, die by the sword kind of moment, where because these characters are so trying so hard to be the smart one, be the one that's manipulating the other person, to resist their emotions, to not fall in love, they become so ill-equipped to deal with the emotions when they finally arise, and they completely lose it and get taken advantage of by somebody else. It's kind of ironic in the way that it works. It's by not allowing themselves to feel emotions, they become more easily manipulated when those emotions inevitably rise up. I mean, it happens to Angela, who's manipulating Marcus. She falls madly in love with Hong Kong because she needs love in her life. It happens to Hong Kong, who's manipulating Angela. He falls in love with the older woman because he needs this love in his life. The real message of the movie isn't that you should be manipulating people. The real message of the movie is that if you think you're the one who's doing the manipulating, in the end, you're going to lose because you're not prepared for what your real emotions are going to be like. It happens to Redfish in the climax of the film, and he's this character that lives by these series of like glib aphorisms like, people don't know what they want, you have to tell them. Even him, this guy who's like, I don't care about anything, I know everything's a hustle, I know what's going on, I'm the smart one, if you're not tricking someone, you're being tricked. He even ends up succumbing to all of his emotions in this totally uncontrollable way because of what happens at the end of the film. It's very interesting because the movie is on one hand extremely, extremely cynical, but on another hand, it's extremely hopeful. And it's the kind of the duality that lies in the center of all of Edward Young's work and movies, is that I think Edward Young thinks that people are awful and horrible and selfish, and he just has this opinion about society. But his message is always that despite this, we need to keep trying to keep our innocence, to keep our earnestness, to not lose our emotion, because that is the only thing that's going to make anything mean anything. The only two characters that end up having a good outcome in this movie are Lun Lun and Marta. And it's because they are earnest and not trying to hustle people. So they end up not getting taken advantage of, even though throughout the film you think that they are going to be. I mean, everybody is trying to take advantage of these characters, and everyone is trying to abuse them. You know, Redfish is trying to essentially pimp out Marta, but they end up avoiding it because they have this kind of pure love in their hearts, I guess, if you really want to be cheesy about it. But that is what's so interesting about the film, is that it in every way is essentially telling you, resist your cynical urge. Give in to being earnest. Give in to being cheesy and sappy. Just do it. That's kind of the brilliance of the film for me. It's about how the entire world is turning towards cynicism and using each other. It's an acknowledgement that that is real. It's not saying that that's not happening, but it's also rejecting it and saying, don't do that. And if you want to take a little bit of like a meta look at the creation of this film, I believe that in some way this is also kind of a critique on the way that art was going at the time that he made it, which is the 90s, the mid-90s. Mahjong was made in 1996. It's a dark crime comedy. And my guess, I'm not sure, but my guess is that this is how it was able to secure its financing, because at the time that was happening, dark crime comedy was like the indie genre, the extremely popular genre around the world. A lot of the most popular films in the mid-90s were these kind of dark crime comedy films like Coen Brothers. It was the same time as Pulp Fiction and the rise of Tarantino. It was like this era of these gritty, cynical films. Mahjong appears to be kind of like another entry into this dark crime genre, one of these cynical movies. But if you look deeper, you see that it's actually a critique of this kind of worldview. It's a critique of this kind of like, take advantage of everyone, play it cool, we only do things if they're ironic, kind of art movement. The thing that secured this thinking in me is at the end of the film with Redfish, there is this huge surge of violence that happens. It's supposed to be funny, but it ends up being very upsetting because it's this uncontrollable outpouring of emotion, and it goes on in like this really excessive way so that it becomes disturbing. It starts like, okay, this is like a shocking joke like you would see in Pulp Fiction when one of the characters gets his head blown off in the car. That's how it's so sudden. And so it's like a typical thing that you would see in a 90s movie, like, wow, we shot somebody. But then it keeps going, and you see the emotion from the character who's engaging in the violence, and he keeps shooting, and blood is everywhere. And it's almost as if, in my mind, Edward Yang is force-feeding us the ironic cynicism that we want. You know, this kind of cynical, sardonic, violent bloodbath that you're supposed to get in a gangster film. And he's showing you the character is breaking down and losing it. And he's showing you the emotion behind it. And he's saying, is this really what you want? Do you really want to see violence like this? Because this is what it is. It's someone losing their shit. You know? It's blood, and it's dirty, and it's messy, and it's not good. The film ends with a kiss between the two most earnest characters, and it completely subverts the expectation of these cynical kind of movies, and it becomes like a romance. And you know, maybe if you're wanting it to be one of these dark comedies, you think like, well, that's a dumb ending. You know, I wanted some kind of irony, I wanted some kind of this. But really what Edward Yang is trying to show you is that you should be like Lun Lun and Marta. The world is awful, people are trying to take advantage of you, but your salvation will not be in making yourself cynical and trying to run the same game that everyone's running. Your salvation will be to give into your emotion, and then you won't be taken advantage of. You know, go the way of love. As cheesy and cliched as you think that might be, that's what's going to keep you from being shot multiple times in an empty, abandoned building. So, yeah, I mean, I really love this idea, and I think that it inspired me to try to be more honest with the art I'm trying to create and not be afraid of expressing what I want to say in a way that is true to what I mean, and not hiding it or couching it in irony or being glib or some kind of thing that I think will make me money. It's kind of a really hopeful worldview that I think is brought out in this movie, and it's a shame that, you know, people don't like this film as much more than they do. I don't know if you agree. Let me know if you don't. If you think the terrible acting ruins this movie so much that even this message doesn't matter, not funny, hate this movie, let me know. Listen to our interview on the Flick Lab podcast. One of the podcast hosts disagreed with my opinion, and so that's an interesting conversation. You can get a different perspective on this film. And let me know what else you want me to review. I think there's a lot more to go into with this movie. I wish I could talk about it for hours and hours and hours. I think there's a little bit of a kind of another message with this movie talking about globalization. But you know, if you want more, I can make like 500 videos on the movie Mahjong. I promise I won't do that. But yeah, let me know what you want to see on the channel. I love hearing from you guys in the comments. Remember to like, share, subscribe, tell your friends, and see you next time. Bye-bye.